Hey everybody, happy Tuesday. I hope that you all are well, and I hope that you had a nice week last week. I know I was a little bit in flux with kind of my travels, and I unexpectedly had to travel for a funeral, but happy to be back in Moscow, and happy to kind of get back into the groove a little bit. So this week, we're going to keep discussing our topic of wine, but we're also going to finish it on Thursday. But today we're going to talk about kind of one of my favorite aspects, not just of wine, but also as it relates to spirits, as it relates to other alcohols and other foods. And the notion that I want to focus on today, and we've heard this term before, is terroir. Okay? Terroir. And interestingly, I think the first thing to maybe make mention of is that it's kind of a made-up word. I mean, you can find various definitions and various kind of explanations of it, but it was invented by the French. I mean, it's a French word to denote a certain aspect of existence, maybe. Okay? And it's particularly applied to wine, but it's not necessarily restricted of wine. You'll see discussions on terroir also exist with cheese, bread, sometimes whiskey, as we'll see next week, and other products of agriculture. Okay? But of course, in wine, and even going back to our discussion last week on some of the uniqueness of wine, in which some of you wrote about the pretentiousness existing in the world of wine, which is true. There is a pride as it exists with the French and as it exists with terroir. Okay? And so what I want to focus on today is a couple of different things. First, I want to orient us to thinking about terroir. And then I want to ask some really interesting, rewarding, and potentially challenging questions about terroir. Okay? Now, first and foremost, terroir. Let me start this way, actually. Okay? And I apologize out of the gates if I'm a little bit more rambly today, just because talking about terroir is actually, it's not necessarily difficult, but there's various ways of diving into it. And I want to dive into it by way of going back to our discussions last week on New World, Old World wines. Okay? And I want to focus on the Old World. Okay? And particularly, I want to focus on France. And that's not to, discriminate on Italy, Spain, Portugal, anywhere else in the Old World. But France gives us the best place to start. And I mean, the word terroir itself is French. Okay? So let's go back to France. And recall in a lot of those discussions last week, I focused on the particular region, Burgundy, right? And so again, kind of north-central, northeast France. And Burgundy grows Pinot Noir, red grape, and Chardonnay, white grape. Okay? Now, in Burgundy, okay, which is a region, right, that there would be those that say that Burgundy, Burgundian, okay, or in French, Bourgogne, has and is, the wines made from Burgundy reflect the terroir of the region of Burgundy. Okay? That again, in those videos from last week, and as we were especially looking at Pinot Noir from Oregon, and then Burgundy Red, Pinot Noir from Burgundy, that there's undoubtedly differences between each wine, even though they're the same grape. Okay? They're just grown in different places, made in similar but also differing techniques. But how do we explain their differences when they're coming from, essentially the same base? Okay? And in particular, the French want to and do advocate for the uniqueness of their wine and their classification of their wine being related to terroir. Okay? And now terroir, right, as we think of Burgundian reds, Burgundian whites, okay, there is, and one way of explaining kind of what you experience with a wine is you appeal to terroir. And most notably, terroir, and there's a lot of different definitions. Again, there's not like a single unique kind of definition of terroir, but there's a lot of differing definitions of terroir. And essentially, as you'll see in one of these other videos, and I think that there's good reason here, but essentially terroir could be defined as placeness. Okay? And place not just meaning like X marks the spot location, but like everything that has gone into that grape cultivation. Okay? And that grape cultivation meaning the soil, meaning sun exposure, meaning microclimate, meaning annual, high temperature, low temperature. Okay? That this idea of water drainage even being like part of a terroir, like everything in a place that has gone to make the wine taste the way that it does. Okay? And not even taste, but smell, right? Okay? Is wrapped up in there. Okay? That it's kind of this interestingly, this almost, well, this is where it gets controversial, undetectable yet present character of a wine or wines. Okay? That when we think about how to have interesting conversations about what terroir is, there's the notion that, if I take a Burgundian red, if I take a red from Burgundy, so Pinot Noir, right, I can measure various things with it, scientifically, objectively, to go back to some terminology that we're familiar with. I can measure the pH, I can measure the acidity, right? I can measure the sugar content, I can measure the alcohol content. I can learn objective properties of that grape. I can go to the vineyard, the row that grape came from, right? But is there something more into that grape? Is there something more that has gone in and that has contributed to the expression of that grape being the way that it is? And if so, then maybe that is terroir, okay? And so an interesting question is, if terroir exists, can it be measured? Okay? If it can't be measured, how do we know that it's there? And 3, if it is there, like if it is in the wine, how do we know, epistemologically speaking? Okay? And so these are just some of the conversations that we're going to start to engage with when it comes to the discussion of terroir. Okay? I'm going to stop there, and then when I pick back up, I think I'm going to dive into handling the hard stuff, and I'll be on page 32, 33, and 34, just for reference, and we'll kind of keep cracking here, okay? Because this conversation, as you can see, I really enjoy.